I pulled into my sister Emma's driveway on Christmas Eve, expecting to see my 7-year-old son, Jake, bouncing with excitement like any normal kid after a family party. The snow had been falling steadily for 3 hours, coating her perfectly manicured lawn with a pristine white blanket that sparkled under the decorative streetlights she'd insisted Richard install last spring. Instead of finding my energetic little boy ready to tell me about all the fun he'd had with his cousins, what I discovered changed everything between my family and me forever. Jake stumbled toward my truck through the ankle-deep snow, his small body trembling violently in the frigid December air that cut through his thin sweater like invisible knives. Tears streamed down his flushed cheeks, leaving wet tracks that were already beginning to freeze in the 28-degree weather. He clutched my leg with desperate fingers, his whole frame shaking so hard I could feel it through my jeans. His voice barely reached above a whisper when he looked up at me with those innocent brown eyes that reminded me so much of his mother Sarah, and said the words that shattered my world completely and forever. Daddy Auntie Emma made me wait outside in the freezing cold while all my cousins opened presents inside. She said I wasn't really family since Mommy died. My blood turned to ice water in my veins as Jake's words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Jake's mother, Sarah, had passed away in a head-on collision with a drunk driver 2 years ago on a rainy Thursday evening when she was coming home from her nursing shift at the regional medical center. Since that devastating night that turned our world upside down, I thought my family had been supportive during our long and difficult grieving process, helping us navigate the choppy waters of single parenthood and childhood loss. Clearly, I had been living in a fool's paradise, blind to the cruelty happening right under my nose. I knelt down in the snow and wrapped my arms around my trembling son, feeling his tiny heart racing against my chest like a frightened bird trapped in a cage. His whole body was ice cold to the touch, and I realized with horror that he'd been standing outside in this bitter weather for who knows how long, while his aunt and cousins enjoyed the warmth and comfort of her beautifully decorated living room. "Tell me exactly what happened, buddy," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm, despite the volcanic rage building inside my chest like molten lava. "Take your time and tell Daddy everything that Auntie Emma did tonight." Between broken sobs that shook his small shoulders, Jake explained how Emma had pulled him aside just 20 minutes before the gift opening ceremony began. She told him he needed to wait outside on the covered porch because there wasn't enough room in the living room for everyone. When he asked why Tyler and Madison got to stay inside, she'd looked him straight in the eye with cold calculation and explained that he needed to learn his place, now that his mother wasn't there to spoil him anymore with constant attention and special treatment. My cousins Tyler and Madison, both 9 years old, and Emma's biological children had watched through the large picture window as Jake stood on the porch in his thin cotton sweater, pressing his small hands and face against the glass, while they tore through brightly wrapped presents and squealed with delight over new toys and games. According to Jake, Tyler had even looked guilty and started to say something to his mother, but Emma had quickly silenced him with a sharp look and a warning that he'd lose his own presence if he kept questioning her decisions. The most heartbreaking detail was that Jake had tried to be good and patient, believing that if he waited quietly and didn't complain, Emma would eventually let him come back inside to join the family celebration. He'd stood there for over 30 minutes watching the warmth and joy happening just inches away from him, separated only by a sheet of glass, and his aunt's inexplicable cruelty. I buckled Jake into his car seat with shaking hands and drove straight back to Emma's house, my knuckles white against the steering wheel as I fought to control the fury threatening to consume me completely. The elaborate Christmas lights she'd strung across her massive colonial home seemed to mock me now, their cheerful twinkling a stark contrast to the cold reality of what had just happened to my son. I'd spent 3 full weekends this past summer helping her husband Richard install those new gutters and paint the entire exterior of their house, working late into the night after my construction shifts ended because I wanted to help family. I'd built their custom kitchen cabinets with my own hands, staying up until 2 in the morning on weeknights to sand and stain the solid oak wood because Emma had mentioned wanting to renovate but couldn't afford to hire professionals. I'd poured my heart, my time, and my money into helping my sister create the perfect home for her family, never imagining she'd use that same home as a weapon against my grieving son. Walking through that familiar front door felt completely different now, like entering enemy territory instead of a safe haven. Emma stood in her pristine living room, wearing the expensive red dress I'd helped Richard pick out for her birthday last month, spending 2 hours at the mall because he wanted to find something special that would make her feel beautiful and appreciated. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled in loose curls, not a single strand out of place, despite the busy evening of hosting. And she had the audacity to look surprised and even slightly annoyed when she saw the expression on my face. "Luke? What are you doing back here so soon? I thought you and Jake went home for the night to get ready for Santa's visit. We need to talk, Emma, right now, about what you did to my son tonight." My parents, Robert and Linda, sat comfortably on the expensive leather couch I'd bought Emma for Christmas last year, along with Richard and the twins Tyler and Madison. The living room looked like a holiday magazine spread with perfectly arranged decorations and not a single item out of place. Everyone turned to stare as I marched into the center of the room with Jake hiding behind my legs, still trembling from his ordeal in the cold. "Emma, did you make my son stand outside in 30-degree weather while the other children opened Christmas presents?" She crossed her arms defensively and lifted her chin with the same stubborn expression she'd worn as a teenager when our parents caught her breaking rules. Jake was being disruptive and overly emotional. He needed some time to calm down and collect himself before rejoining the group. "He's 7 years old, Emma, and it's 28 degrees outside. He could have gotten hypothermia or frostbite standing out there in just a sweater." "Don't be so dramatic and overprotective, Luke. A little fresh air never hurt anyone, and Jake needs to learn that he can't always be the center of attention." The casual dismissal in her voice made my anger spike even higher. She was treating my son's suffering like a minor inconvenience, as if emotional abuse was just another parenting tool in her arsenal. But then she said the words that changed everything between us forever and revealed the true depth of her calculated cruelty. Emma looked directly at Jake with those cold green eyes that suddenly seemed like a stranger's and spoke with chilling calmness that made my blood run cold. "Jake needs to learn his place now that his mother isn't here to coddle him anymore. This family has real children to focus on, and we can't keep walking on eggshells around his constant need for special treatment." The room went dead silent except for the crackling of logs in the fireplace. Even Richard's face went pale as he realized what his wife had just admitted in front of everyone. The twins stared at their mother with confusion and growing horror while my parents sat frozen in shock at their daughter's words. But Emma wasn't finished destroying my faith in my own family or my son's sense of belonging. "I did it intentionally, Luke, and I'm not sorry. Jake gets far too much attention and sympathy already, and frankly, we're all getting tired of walking on eggshells around your personal tragedy. Sarah is dead, and it's time for both of you to move on instead of expecting the world to revolve around your grief." My hands started shaking with pure, unadulterated fury. This wasn't some misunderstanding or temporary lapse in judgment caused by holiday stress. This was deliberate, premeditated emotional abuse toward a grieving child who had done nothing wrong except lose his mother in a senseless accident. Without another word, I walked to her kitchen and began removing the cabinet doors I'd handcrafted from solid oak wood, the same doors I'd spent countless hours sanding and finishing to perfection because I wanted Emma to have something beautiful and lasting. Emma's scream pierced the air like a banshee wail as I loaded the cabinet doors into the back of my truck. "What do you think you're doing to my kitchen? Have you lost your mind completely? Taking back everything I ever gave you since you clearly don't understand the meaning of family or basic human decency." Richard jumped up from his chair like he'd been electrocuted, his face flushed with panic and confusion. Luke, please let's discuss this rationally and calmly. Emma didn't mean what she said. She's just stressed from hosting everyone tonight. Yes, I absolutely did mean every single word. Emma snapped her mask of Christmas cheer and perfect hostess, finally slipping completely away to reveal the person she really was underneath. I'm sick and tired of pretending Jake is some precious little angel who deserves special treatment just because his mother died in a car accident. We all have problems and losses to deal with. I continued dismantling the kitchen island I'd built from scratch my power drill, whirring as I removed each screw with methodical precision. The island had taken me 6 weekends to complete working in my garage during the evenings after Jake went to sleep, cutting and shaping each piece of wood by hand, because I wanted it to be perfect for Emma's dream kitchen renovation. Emma lunged toward me, trying to grab the drill from my hands, but at 6 feet 2 inches tall and 200 pounds of muscle built from years of construction work, she barely reached my shoulder and couldn't overpower me. Stop destroying my house, you psychopath. This is vandalism and theft. I'll call the police. It's not destruction when I'm taking back my own property that I built with my own hands and paid for with my own money. That's when my father Robert stood up slowly, his weathered face stern with the kind of disapproval I remembered from childhood, when I'd broken his tools or lied about my grades. At 61 years old, he still carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 30 years fixing engines at the local garage and settling disputes between his workers. His stocky frame positioned itself directly in front of the door, blocking my exit route, with the determination of someone who believed he was preventing a family catastrophe. Luke, you're embarrassing this entire family with this childish tantrum. Sit down and work this out like a civilized adult instead of acting like some kind of maniac. Dad, she emotionally abused your grandson. She made a 7-year-old child stand in freezing weather, while other children enjoyed Christmas morning. How is that not worth getting upset about? Children need discipline and structure, Luke. Emma was probably just trying to teach Jake some manners and help him learn that he can't always get his way through tears and manipulation. My mother Linda nodded enthusiastically in agreement from her spot on the couch, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, and her hands folded in her lap with the same primness she displayed when playing organ at our family's Methodist church every Sunday morning. She'd always taken Emma's side in family disputes, seeing her daughter as the responsible one who'd married well and created the kind of stable home life that looked good to the outside world. Luke, dear, you're overreacting to normal sibling dynamics and children being children. Emma has 2 kids of her own to manage, plus she's hosting this entire family gathering. Maybe Jake was being difficult and needed some time to adjust his attitude. I stared at my parents in complete disbelief, feeling like I was looking at strangers instead of the people who'd raised me. They were actually taking Emma's side after hearing exactly what she'd done to their own grandson, defending her decision to leave a grieving child outside in potentially dangerous weather conditions. I walked past Robert's blocking attempt and began carrying out the heavy dining room table I'd crafted from solid walnut wood, the same table where Emma hosted her monthly dinner parties and pretended to be the perfect family matriarch. You can't take our dining room furniture, Richard protested weakly, following me outside into the snow. We have Christmas dinner planned for tomorrow with Linda's sister's family. Where will everyone sit? Then you should have thought about the consequences before your wife decided to torture a 7-year-old child for her own twisted entertainment. As I loaded the table into my truck bed, securing it with bungee cords to prevent damage during transport, Jake found his voice for the first time since we'd arrived back at the house. His small frame appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light from inside, tears still wet on his cheeks, but his voice carrying surprising strength and determination. Daddy, Auntie Emma has been saying mean things to me for a long time, not just tonight. She told me that you don't love me anymore, and that I'm just a burden now that Mommy is gone. She said you only pretend to want me around because people expect you to. The weight of those words hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus, knocking the breath from my lungs. Emma had been systematically destroying my son's sense of security and belonging over an extended period, and I'd been completely oblivious to the psychological warfare being waged against my child. I thought back to all the times Jake had seemed withdrawn and sad after visiting Emma's house, how he'd started asking strange questions about whether I really wanted him around or if I'd be happier without the responsibility of raising him alone. Richard's face went ashen white as he processed this devastating revelation. Emma, please tell me that's not true. Please tell me you didn't say those horrible things to a grieving child. Emma's carefully maintained composure finally cracked under the pressure of everyone's staring eyes and growing horror. Fine. Yes, I said those things to him. Someone needed to prepare Jake for reality instead of filling his head with fairy tales. Luke can't handle being a single father, and Jake needs to understand that his neediness and constant emotional demands are becoming a serious problem for everyone who has to deal with him. She also took some of my money. Richard whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind whistling through the trees. The child support money Luke sends for Jake's care during overnight visits. Emma told me she was putting it in a special college fund for Jake, but I found the bank statements last week. She's been using it for her shopping trips and spa days. The betrayal ran so much deeper than I'd ever imagined possible. Emma hadn't just been cruel to Jake on an emotional level. She'd been systematically stealing from him too, taking the money I sent to ensure his comfort and well-being during family visits and using it to fund her own selfish desires. I walked back into the house and began removing the living room furniture I'd purchased when Emma claimed she couldn't afford to properly host family gatherings and asked if I could help her create a welcoming space for everyone to enjoy. Every single thing I ever gave you is coming with me tonight, Emma. You don't deserve any of it, and I should have seen your true character years ago. Emma's iPhone lay face up on the kitchen counter where she'd left it while serving dessert earlier in the evening, and when a notification lit up the screen with an incoming message, I caught sight of something that made my stomach turn with revulsion. The preview showed a video thumbnail of Jake crying on her front porch, his small face pressed against the window glass in obvious distress. I grabbed the phone before Emma could stop me, my construction worker reflexes faster than her desperate lunge. Give that back to me right now. You have no legal right to go through my personal property. But I was already opening the video application, scrolling through her recent recordings with growing horror. The timestamp showed the video was from earlier tonight, less than 2 hours ago. And what I saw made me want to put my fist through the nearest wall. Emma had recorded Jake standing outside her house for over 5 minutes, his small body shivering uncontrollably as he pressed his hands against the window and tried to see inside where his family was celebrating without him. The audio captured her mocking voice, providing commentary like some kind of twisted nature documentary. Look at this little drama queen putting on quite the performance tonight. He thinks crying and looking pitiful will get him sympathy and special treatment, but he needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around his sob story and trauma. The video showed her zooming in on Jake's tears, capturing his obvious confusion and hurt in high-definition detail. She'd posted it to her private social media account with the caption, "When kids try to manipulate you with crocodile tears, but you stand your ground and refuse to be emotionally blackmailed. Sometimes tough love is the only way to teach important life lessons. You recorded my son's suffering and posted it online for entertainment. You turned his pain into content for your social media followers." Emma snatched the phone back with aggressive force, her face flushed with defiance rather than shame or remorse. "I documented his manipulative behavior so people would understand what I have to deal with on a regular basis. You've turned Jake into an attention-seeking little manipulator, and everyone needs to see the truth about how he tries to control situations through emotional outbursts." The truth? I could barely form coherent words through the red haze of rage clouding my vision. The truth is that you're a sociopathic monster who enjoys tormenting children. That's when Emma completely lost any pretense of self-control and started screaming every vicious thought she'd apparently been harboring for the past 2 years since Sarah's death. You want the absolute truth, Luke? Fine, I'll give you more truth than you can handle. I'm sick and tired of everyone treating you like some kind of heroic saint because your wife died in a car accident. Boo-hoo, tragedy happens. Life goes on, get over it already. I'm exhausted from watching you get all the sympathy and attention while I work my ass off, raising 2 kids and managing a household, and nobody notices or appreciates my efforts. Her voice rose to a shriek that could probably be heard by the neighbors. You dump Jake here whenever it's convenient for your work schedule and expect us to pretend he's not completely damaged goods with serious behavioral problems. Everyone tiptoes around his feelings because of his tragic backstory, but somebody needs to speak the truth about your complete inability to handle single parenthood. Robert's weathered face turned red with anger, but incredibly his fury wasn't directed at Emma's cruelty. Luke, your sister is just overwhelmed and stressed from the holidays. She didn't mean those harsh words. You know Emma loves Jake? Yes, I absolutely meant every single word, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Emma continued, her voice rising even higher as she fed off her own anger. I've been telling people the truth about Luke being an emotionally unstable single father who dumps his kid on family constantly because he can't cope with the responsibilities of widowed parenthood. My mother Linda gasped dramatically and pressed her hand to her chest like she was having heart palpitations. Emma, surely you didn't say such private family business to outsiders and neighbors. I told Mrs. Patterson next door, all the ladies from my Tuesday book club, the other mothers from Tyler and Madison's school, and anyone else who asked about Luke's situation or offered sympathy for our family's struggles. I explained the full truth about how he's constantly asking for help and taking advantage of family generosity because he fundamentally can't cope with being a widower and single parent. The humiliation burned through my veins like sulfuric acid. Emma had been systematically destroying my reputation throughout our entire community, painting me as an incompetent father who used his wife's tragic death as an excuse to burden others with his responsibilities. I thought about all the strange looks I'd been getting at Jake's school events over the past few months, the way some neighbors had stopped making eye contact when I walked by, the subtle changes in how other parents interacted with me at Little League games. And that's not all she's done, Richard said quietly, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion and barely contained rage. Tell him about the birthday cards and presents, Emma. Tell Luke what you did during his work deployment. Emma's eyes darted nervously between Richard and me, realizing she'd been caught in something else entirely. I don't know what you're talking about, Richard. Stop trying to make me look worse than I already do. The birthday cards and gifts Luke sent Jake during his 8-week deployment to the job site in Nevada. Emma threw them all away and told Jake that his father had forgotten his birthday completely. I felt like someone had reached into my chest cavity and squeezed my heart until it burst. 2 months ago, I'd been sent to a construction site in another state for 8 weeks of specialized work that paid double overtime rates. I'd mailed Jake 3 different birthday packages, totaling over $300, including a remote control helicopter he'd been begging for since summer, a complete Lego architecture set, and a handwritten letter explaining how much I missed him and couldn't wait to celebrate together when I returned home. When I called him on his 8th birthday, Jake had been unusually quiet and subdued. When I asked excitedly if he'd gotten my special surprises, he just said, "It's okay, Daddy," in the smallest, most heartbroken voice I'd ever heard from him. You made my son think I forgot his birthday while I was working 16-hour days to support us financially. Emma lifted her chin with stubborn, unrepentant pride. I was teaching him not to depend on unreliable people who make promises they can't keep. You were gone for weeks at a time, Luke. Jake needed to learn that people disappear and break promises, and it's better to expect nothing than to be constantly disappointed. I was working to provide for my son, Those gifts cost me $300 that I could barely afford on top of sending you money for his care. Linda finally spoke up, her voice trembling with dawning realization. Emma, you told me that Luke hadn't contacted Jake for weeks during his work trip. You said he was becoming distant and irresponsible as a father? Because I was protecting Jake from getting his hopes up every time Luke made empty promises about staying in touch and sending special surprises. It's better for children to expect nothing than to be constantly let down by adults who can't follow through. The scope of Emma's manipulation was absolutely staggering in its calculated cruelty. She'd been poisoning every single relationship in my life, turning family members against me, while simultaneously destroying Jake's trust in my love and commitment to him as his father. I began removing the elaborate Christmas tree from her living room ornaments, scattering across her polished hardwood floors like broken dreams. That tree came from my own property. Jake and I spent an entire Saturday afternoon cutting it down together and loading it into my truck because you said you couldn't afford to buy one this year. Luke stopped this insanity immediately, Robert demanded with the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. You're acting like a complete lunatic and destroying your sister's home. I'm acting like a father protecting his son from systematic psychological abuse disguised as family love. I pulled out my cell phone with hands that were surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system and called my friend Marcus Williams, who happened to be one of the best family law attorneys in the county. He answered on the second ring, probably wondering why anyone was calling him at 9:45 on Christmas Eve night. Marcus, I need you at my sister's house immediately, and I mean right now. Bring your voice recorder and a witness if you have one available on short notice. Luke, what's going on? Is Jake okay? Are you in some kind of danger? Just get here as fast as you can. I'll explain everything when you arrive, but I need legal documentation of what's happening tonight. While we waited for Marcus to make the 20-minute drive from his house across town, I continued systematically removing everything I'd ever given Emma over the years. The custom coffee table I'd built last spring when she complained about not having enough surface space in her living room. The built-in bookshelf I'd installed in Tyler and Madison's playroom because Emma said she couldn't afford professional carpentry work. Even the outdoor patio furniture set I'd given them for their wedding anniversary last year, thinking it would create more opportunities for family gatherings and quality time together. With each item I loaded into my truck, Emma became more hysterical and desperate. You're stealing from us. This is robbery and vandalism. Richard, call the police right now. I'm not calling anyone, Richard said with newfound firmness in his voice. You brought this nightmare on yourself, Emma, and I'm not protecting you from the consequences anymore. That's when I revealed the ace I'd been keeping up my sleeve since the moment Emma first admitted her intentional cruelty. I held up my smartphone, which had been recording audio since the moment we'd walked back into the house, and Emma began her confessions. Everything you've said tonight has been recorded in high-definition audio, Emma. Every single admission of deliberate abuse, every confession about lying to family members and neighbors, every detail about stealing Jake's child support money and destroying his birthday gifts. Emma's face went white as fresh snow, all the blood draining from her features, as the legal implications hit her like a freight train. You can't record someone without their consent. That's completely illegal and inadmissible in court. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. And I consented to recording my own participation in our discussion. Everything you've said is perfectly legal evidence that can be used in family court proceedings. Marcus arrived 45 minutes later with his paralegal Jessica Chen, a stern woman in her 50s, who'd seen every conceivable type of family crisis and domestic situation during her 20-year career in family law. I played them the entire recording, while Emma sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that her words had consequences beyond just hurting feelings. Mrs. Emma, Marcus said with professional gravity, what I've heard on this recording constitutes clear and documented evidence of child emotional abuse, financial fraud regarding court-ordered support payments, and potentially criminal harassment of a minor child. You could face serious legal consequences, including loss of visitation rights and possible criminal charges. It's not abuse. I was just trying to discipline him and teach him important life lessons. Everything I did was for his own good. Making a child stand outside in freezing weather as punishment is legally considered endangerment of a minor. Recording his emotional distress for social media entertainment could be prosecuted as exploitation and abuse of a child. Emma began crying now, but they were tears of self-pity and fear rather than genuine remorse for the pain she'd caused. I never meant for things to escalate this far. I was just frustrated and overwhelmed with everything I have to manage. Then, you'll have no problem confessing your lies to every single person you've manipulated over the past 2 years? I said, my voice steady with cold determination. You're going to call Mrs. Patterson, your book club friends, the school parents, and anyone else you've spread lies to about my parenting abilities. You're going to tell them the complete truth about what you've been doing to Jake and apologize for your deception. Luke, that level of public humiliation isn't necessary, Linda protested weakly. Emma has learned her lesson and feels terrible about her mistakes. No, Mom. She feels terrible about getting caught, not about what she did to an innocent child. I walked to Emma's backyard and began dismantling the elaborate wooden playground set I'd built 2 summers ago for all the grandchildren to enjoy together. It had taken me 2 full weekends and cost over $800 in premium materials because I wanted to create something that would last for years and provide countless hours of safe entertainment. As I loaded the swing set components and slide pieces into my truck, Jake appeared beside me in the falling snow. Daddy, can you take the monkey bars too? Tyler and Madison never let me use them anyway. Auntie Emma always said the playground was only for real family members, not visitors. That innocent comment reached Robert like a physical slap across his weathered face. For the first time all evening, my father's expression shifted from anger and disapproval to genuine horror as he truly began to understand what Emma had been systematically doing to his beloved grandson. Jake looked up at Robert with those trusting brown eyes that had always melted his grandfather's heart and delivered the final devastating blow. Grandpa, Auntie Emma told me that you think I'm too much trouble too. She said you and Grandma wish Daddy would stop bringing me to family things because I make everyone uncomfortable with my sadness about Mommy. Robert's entire face crumpled with anguish and disbelief. Jake, that's absolutely not true, buddy. Grandpa loves having you here more than anything in the world. Then why did Auntie Emma say it? She said everyone in the family talks about how much easier things would be if I wasn't around so much. Robert turned to Emma with volcanic fury blazing in his eyes, 20 years of construction work, evident in his powerful frame, as he took a threatening step toward his daughter. You turned my grandson against me. You made that innocent child think his own grandfather didn't want him around. I was just trying to manage everyone's expectations and prepare Jake for disappointment, Emma whispered, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of her cruelty. You were systematically destroying this entire family from the inside out with calculated lies and manipulation. Robert said, his voice shaking with rage and heartbreak. My 7-year-old son came home, shaking, and whispered, Auntie told me to wait outs. Robert walked directly to Emma with the purposeful stride of a man who'd made an irreversible decision and spoke in the voice he'd used when I was a teenager, caught lying about breaking curfew or sneaking out to parties. Emma, you have deliberately poisoned this entire family with your lies, manipulation, and psychological abuse. I'm ashamed and disgusted to call you my daughter. Daddy, please don't say such terrible things. I made some mistakes, but I was trying to help everyone by being realistic about difficult situations. Help! Robert's voice cracked with emotion. You convinced me that Luke was taking advantage of our generosity and using his wife's death as an excuse to dump his responsibilities on family members. You made me believe Jake was becoming spoiled and overly demanding because of too much sympathy. You turned me against my own son and grandson based on complete fabrications and lies. Linda stood up from the couch with trembling legs, her face pale with dawning realization and crushing guilt. Emma, you told me Luke was becoming distant and irresponsible as a father. You said he was using Sarah's tragic death as an excuse to avoid his parental duties and burden everyone else with childcare. I believed every word you said. Linda continued, her voice breaking with shame and regret. I actually believed my own daughter over my maternal instincts. I've been cold and judgmental toward Luke for months because I thought he was taking advantage of our kindness and sympathy. Richard cleared his throat nervously before speaking, gathering courage he'd apparently been building for weeks or months. There's something else everyone needs to know about Emma's behavior patterns and the scope of her deception. Emma shot him a warning glare filled with desperation and barely concealed threats. But Richard had apparently found his spine after years of enabling her manipulation and emotional abuse. Emma has been financially abusing me for over a year. She's been hiding major purchases from me, opening credit cards in my name without permission and maxing them out on shopping sprees and luxury items. When I confronted her about the unauthorized accounts, she told me I was being controlling and financially abusive myself. Jessica, the paralegal, began taking detailed notes, her expression growing grimmer with each new revelation about the scope of Emma's deceptive behavior. Mr. Richard, do you have documentation and evidence of these fraudulent accounts and unauthorized charges? Everything is stored in my home office filing cabinet. Emma forged my signature on at least 3 different credit card applications and 1 personal loan application. The total debt is approaching $15,000. Emma jumped up from her chair with panicked desperation, realizing that her financial crimes were about to be exposed along with everything else. Richard, you can't air our private business like this in front of everyone. We agreed to handle that situation between ourselves. We agreed to absolutely nothing, Emma. You told me to keep quiet about the fraud, or you'd take Tyler and Madison and disappear to another state where I'd never see them again. Tyler and Madison had been sitting quietly in the corner throughout this entire devastating confrontation, but now Tyler spoke up with the brutal honesty only a 9-year-old could deliver without filters or social politeness. Mom, we knew what you were doing to Jake was really mean and wrong. Madison tried to ask you to let him come inside during present time, but you said if we complained or questioned your decisions, we wouldn't get any Christmas presents either. Madison nodded solemnly, her young face serious with the weight of adult knowledge forced on her too early. We felt really bad watching Jake cry outside in the cold, but we were scared of making Mom angry like Jake did. The revelation hit everyone like a physical blow. Even Emma's own biological children had been living in fear of her emotional manipulation and threats, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her anger or losing her conditional love. I realized Jake wasn't her only victim. She'd been controlling everyone around her through intimidation, guilt, and the constant threat of emotional or financial consequences. Marcus pulled me aside and spoke in low, professional tones. Luke, based on everything I've witnessed and recorded tonight, you have substantial grounds for an emergency custody modification and possibly criminal charges against your sister. The audio evidence combined with witness testimony creates a very strong case. What does that mean for Jake's safety and well-being? It means Emma should have absolutely no unsupervised contact with your son until she completes court-mandated counseling and anger management programs. The financial fraud against Richard could result in felony charges if he chooses to prosecute fully. Emma must have overheard our conversation because she began begging frantically, all pretense of dignity abandoned. Luke, please don't involve the courts and legal system. I'll do better, I promise, on my children's lives. I'll apologize to Jake and make everything right. Apologies don't undo 2 years of systematic psychological damage and trauma, Emma. The front door opened unexpectedly, and Emma's next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, walked in carrying a covered casserole dish, clearly expecting to join a normal holiday gathering filled with warmth and family joy. Instead, she found a living room charged with tension and my truck parked outside, obviously loaded with furniture and household items. Oh my goodness, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I brought my famous green bean casserole for tomorrow's dinner. Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I said with grim satisfaction, you're here at the perfect time. Emma has something very important she needs to tell you about the lies she's been spreading regarding my parenting abilities and character. Emma's face went crimson with humiliation as she realized her carefully maintained reputation in the neighborhood was about to be completely destroyed along with everything else she'd built through deception. Mrs. Patterson set down her casserole dish on the kitchen counter and looked around the room with growing confusion and concern. Emma, dear, what exactly is Luke talking about? What lies? Emma glanced desperately between her neighbor and me, searching frantically for some way to escape this moment of final accountability. Her eyes darted toward the back door, and for a moment I thought she might actually try to run away from the confrontation entirely. When she realized there was no escape route that wouldn't make her look even more guilty, she made one final desperate attempt to manipulate the situation by threatening self-harm. If you force me to humiliate myself in front of the neighbors and destroy my reputation in this community, I swear I'll hurt myself seriously. Is that what you really want, Luke? To drive your sister to suicide over some family misunderstanding? This isn't a misunderstanding, Emma. This is systematic child abuse fraud and deliberate psychological manipulation. That's when Jake surprised everyone in the room by stepping forward with remarkable courage for a 7-year-old child who'd been terrorized and manipulated for months. He looked directly at Emma with clear, unwavering eyes and spoke with conviction that would have made his mother proud. You're a mean person, Auntie Emma, and I don't want to see you anymore. You made me think Daddy didn't love me, but I know now that Daddy loves me very much and you were lying. The simple honesty in Jake's young voice cut through Emma's dramatic threats and manipulative tactics more effectively than any adult confrontation could have achieved. Here was a vulnerable child standing up to his abuser, refusing to be intimidated or controlled any longer by her emotional blackmail. Robert walked over to Emma and spoke with quiet authority, earned through 60 years of life experience. Emma, your threats of self-harm are just another manipulation tactic in a long pattern of emotional blackmail. I've watched you use guilt and fear to control people your entire life, but this behavior ends tonight. Daddy, please, I really do need help. I realize I've made serious mistakes and I want to change. You need professional psychological help? Yes, that's absolutely true, but first you're going to tell Mrs. Patterson exactly what lies you've been spreading about Luke throughout this neighborhood, and then you're going to call every single person you've gossiped to and retract your false statements publicly. Emma looked around the room with increasing desperation, searching for any ally or sympathetic face, but found only disappointed and disgusted expressions staring back at her. Even her own children had moved away from her, seeking comfort and safety with their father instead of the mother who'd taught them to live in fear. Mrs. Patterson. Emma began reluctantly, her voice barely above a whisper. I may have exaggerated some concerns about Luke's parenting abilities and emotional stability. Exaggerated how exactly I need to understand what you've been telling people. I handed Mrs. Patterson my phone with the recording application ready to play. Listen to this complete conversation and decide for yourself what Emma actually said about me and my son over the past 2 years. As Mrs. Patterson listened to Emma's recorded admissions about systematically lying to the neighborhood, spreading false rumors, and deliberately sabotaging my reputation, her expression shifted from confusion to disgust and finally to anger. When the recording finished several minutes later, she looked at Emma with genuine disappointment and betrayal. Emma, I based my entire opinion of Luke on your word and testimony. I've been treating him like an irresponsible father who uses his wife's tragic death as an excuse to burden everyone around him because you convinced me that was the truth. I was just venting my frustrations about family stress. I didn't mean for people to take my complaints so seriously or literally. You specifically told me that Luke dumps Jake here constantly and expects you to raise his child for him while he goes off to work and social activities. You said he's emotionally unstable and probably shouldn't have custody of a young child. Linda gasped and covered her mouth in horror. Emma, you told complete strangers and neighbors that Luke was unfit for custody of his own son. I may have implied that he was struggling more than he should be, and that Jake might be better off in a more stable environment. Richard finally reached his absolute breaking point and announced the decision he'd apparently been contemplating throughout this entire devastating evening. Emma, I'm filing for separation first thing tomorrow morning. I'm taking Tyler and Madison, and we're moving out of this house permanently. You can't take my children away from me. I'm their mother. I can, and I absolutely will. They've witnessed your systematic emotional abuse of a grieving child, and I won't expose them to any more of your toxic manipulative behavior patterns. Tyler and Madison both nodded in enthusiastic agreement, clearly relieved that their father was finally protecting them from their mother's psychological manipulation and emotional terrorism. Mrs. Patterson excused herself quickly, obviously uncomfortable with witnessing the complete collapse of her neighbor's family and marriage. But before she left, she turned to me with sincere remorse and regret. Luke, I owe you a tremendous apology for my behavior over the past several months. I've been cold and judgmental toward you based entirely on Emma's lies, and I'm deeply ashamed of my treatment of you. You're obviously a devoted father, and Jake is incredibly lucky to have you protecting him. After Mrs. Patterson left, Marcus presented Emma with formal legal documents he'd prepared on his laptop computer during the evening's events. Emma, this is an official no-contact order regarding Jake. You will have absolutely no unsupervised visits with him until you complete a minimum of 6 months of court-mandated counseling and anger management classes. 6 months, that's completely excessive punishment for some family disagreements. Actually, it's remarkably generous, Jessica interjected firmly. Based on all the evidence we've collected tonight, the court could easily order permanent, supervised visitation only or potentially terminate your visitation rights entirely. The final shocking revelation came when Mrs. Patterson returned 10 minutes later with her husband, Mr. Patterson, who worked as a private security consultant and had access to sophisticated recording equipment. He carried a tablet computer showing video footage from their home security system that covered part of Emma's front porch area. Luke, I think you absolutely need to see this evidence. Our security cameras have inadvertently captured Emma's front porch area over the past several months, and we've recorded multiple incidents of Jake being forced to stand outside alone in various weather conditions. The footage showed at least 8 different occasions over the past 4 months when Emma had forced Jake to stand outside her house in rain-cold temperatures and even light snow sometimes for over an hour, while family activities continued inside without him. In one particularly disturbing clip from last month, she could be clearly seen laughing and pointing at Jake through the window while he cried on her doorstep, apparently entertaining her own children with his suffering. This is documented evidence of systematic child endangerment and emotional abuse, Marcus said grimly. Emma, you're extremely fortunate that Luke isn't pressing criminal charges tonight because this footage could support serious felony convictions. Emma finally broke down, completely collapsing into a chair as she realized the full scope of consequences she was facing for her deliberate cruelty. Her perfect facade had crumbled entirely, revealing the calculating and manipulative person she'd always been underneath her charming exterior and community reputation. 6 months later, I stood in Jake's bedroom doorway on a warm Saturday morning, watching him play enthusiastically with the elaborate Lego space station set that had been a belated Christmas gift from his grandfather Robert. The boy who had once trembled in fear outside Emma's house, questioning whether his own father truly loved him, had blossomed into a confident and joyful child who knew his worth and felt genuinely secure in his place within our reconstituted family structure. Emma had completed her court-mandated counseling program at the Regional Mental Health Center, though her progress remained uncertain and closely monitored. The therapist's reports indicated she was beginning to understand the severity of her actions, but genuine empathy and remorse were still developing slowly. She'd written Jake a formal letter of apology, taking full responsibility for her cruel behavior and acknowledging the deep psychological pain she'd caused him. The letter sat in my desk drawer, waiting for Jake to decide if and when he felt ready to read it or engage with his aunt's attempts at making amends. Dr. Martinez, our family counselor, had worked patiently with Jake through 6 months of play therapy and structured conversations designed to help him process the emotional trauma Emma had inflicted. Through creative exercises, storytelling, and honest discussions, Jake learned to trust his own perceptions again and understand that his aunt's cruelty reflected her internal problems rather than any deficiency in his worth as a person deserving of love and protection. "Daddy," Jake had said during one particularly breakthrough session, "Dr. Martinez helped me understand that when people are mean to kids, it's because something is broken inside the grown-up, not because the kid did anything wrong." Robert and Linda had undergone their own transformation, evolving into actively involved grandparents who spent every Saturday with Jake and worked diligently to make up for the months they'd allowed Emma's lies to poison their relationship with both of us. Linda now picked Jake up from school twice a week and helped him with homework while I finished work, and Robert had started teaching him basic carpentry skills in my garage workshop every weekend. "Grandpa says, I'm going to be even better with tools than you are, Daddy," Jake had announced proudly last week while showing me the perfectly sanded wood piece he'd prepared for a birdhouse project. "And Grandma says, when I'm ready, she'll teach me to play piano like she does at church," he'd added with genuine excitement about spending time with grandparents who now appreciated his presence instead of seeing him as a burden. Richard had successfully divorced Emma and maintained a friendship with me that benefited all our children tremendously. Tyler and Madison came over regularly for play dates, with Jake having formed genuine bonds free from their mother's toxic influence and manipulation. The 3 children had even started their own little carpentry club in my garage, learning to build birdhouses' simple furniture and toy boxes under Robert's patient and encouraging guidance. "Can we make a bookshelf for my room next Mr. Luke?" Madison had asked last weekend, her confidence growing as she mastered new skills and enjoyed healthy adult relationships. "And I want to learn how to make a desk like Tyler's." Jake had chimed in, thrilled to be included in activities without fear of arbitrary punishment or exclusion. Emma herself remained a carefully monitored peripheral figure in our extended family structure. She'd moved to a small apartment across town and found employment as a receptionist at a pediatric dental office, where her interactions with children were supervised and professional rather than personal. Her social media accounts, once filled with perfectly staged photographs of her ideal life and family, now sat largely empty as she worked to rebuild her sense of self-worth without relying on external validation and the appearance of perfection. The neighbors who'd once admired her beautiful home and seemingly perfect family now understood the darkness and manipulation that had existed behind her polished exterior facade. Mrs. Patterson had become one of our strongest supporters, often bringing Jake homemade cookies and taking genuine interest in his school achievements and Little League baseball progress. That Emma certainly had all of us fooled, Mrs. Patterson had confided to me recently. She seemed like such a devoted mother and sister, but I guess you never really know what goes on behind closed doors. The most important and dramatic change had occurred within Jake himself. The anxious, withdrawn child who once questioned his father's love and his own worth had grown into an outgoing 8-year-old who expressed his feelings openly and trusted the adults in his life to protect and support him. He'd started playing Little League baseball, where his natural athleticism and competitive spirit flourished in a healthy environment. He'd made several close friends at school who invited him to birthday parties and sleepovers, building social connections that reinforced his sense of belonging and normalcy. Most importantly, he never again wondered whether his daddy truly wanted him around or saw him as a burden. The security of our father-son bond had been tested by Emma's manipulation, but ultimately emerged stronger than ever. Daddy. Jake said one evening as I tucked him into bed, after reading 3 chapters of his favorite adventure novel, "I'm glad Auntie Emma had to learn better ways to treat people and kids. Maybe someday when she's really changed, she can be part of our family again in a good way." His capacity for forgiveness and hope continually humbled me, though I remained vigilant and protective regarding any future contact with Emma. Trust could potentially be rebuilt over time, but only after sustained proof of genuine change and complete commitment to healthy behavior patterns. Jake's emotional safety would always be my primary concern, regardless of family pressure or social expectations about forgiveness and reconciliation. The legal proceedings had concluded with Emma receiving 18 months of supervised probation and 200 hours of mandatory community service at the county children's shelter, where she was required to witness firsthand the devastating effects of child abuse and neglect on vulnerable young people. Richard had ultimately chosen not to pursue criminal charges for the credit card fraud, focusing instead on rebuilding his life with Tyler and Madison in their new home across town. Mrs. Patterson and several other neighbors had apologized personally for their cold treatment of me based on Emma's systematic lies and character assassination. Our community relationships had been restored and even strengthened by the shared understanding that protecting children requires vigilance and courage, even when the threat comes from within the family structure itself and challenges our assumptions about people we think we know well. I'd learned invaluable lessons about trusting my parental instincts and never ignoring subtle warning signs about Jake's emotional well-being and happiness. The guilt I carried about missing the early signs of Emma's psychological abuse had motivated me to become more attuned to Jake's moods, more protective of his vulnerable spirit, and more willing to investigate when something seemed wrong instead of assuming the best about family members. Most importantly, I discovered that defending my son sometimes meant making decisions that others wouldn't understand or support initially. Family harmony built on enabling abuse and maintaining silence about harmful behavior wasn't worth preserving. A parent's primary duty is always their child's emotional and physical safety, not maintaining pleasant relationships with toxic relatives who prioritize their own comfort and image over a vulnerable child's welfare. True family members support and protect the most vulnerable among them, especially children who cannot protect themselves from adult manipulation and cruelty. They don't sacrifice innocent victims to maintain appearances or avoid difficult conversations about harmful behavior patterns that need to be addressed and corrected. Jake had taught me that children possess remarkable resilience when they feel genuinely loved, protected, and valued by the adults responsible for their care. He'd also shown me that kids often understand family dynamics more clearly than adults give them credit for, and their voices deserve to be heard and believed when they report mistreatment or express concerns about their safety and emotional well-being. The Christmas Eve that had started with my son trembling in fear and confusion had ultimately led to his liberation from psychological abuse and the restoration of healthy family relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine care rather than manipulation and control. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is remove their child from harmful situations, even when doing so creates significant conflict with other family members and challenges long-established relationship patterns. As I watched Jake sleeping peacefully in his bed, surrounded by toys and books and artwork from school that celebrated his creativity and growth, I felt profound gratitude for finding the strength to fight for his welfare when it mattered most. Every child deserves to feel wanted, valued, and protected by the adults in their lives. When that protection fails or is compromised, it becomes essential for someone to step forward and restore the safety and love that every young person needs to thrive and develop into their full potential. The experience had also taught me about the importance of community support and the courage required to speak truth about difficult family situations. Mrs. Patterson's security footage had been crucial evidence, and her willingness to get involved despite the awkwardness had made a significant difference in documenting Emma's pattern of abuse. Looking back, I realized that Emma's behavior hadn't developed overnight. There had been warning signs I'd missed or dismissed as personality quirks or stress-related responses. Her need for control, her resentment of attention given to others, her tendency to manipulate situations to her advantage while playing the victim, all of these traits had been present but overlooked because I wanted to believe the best about my sister. The financial counseling Richard and I had both attended taught us about the connection between emotional abuse and financial manipulation. Emma's pattern of using money as a weapon against both Jake and Richard reflected deeper issues with control and entitlement that required professional intervention to address effectively. Jake's relationship with his cousins, Tyler and Madison, had become one of the most positive outcomes of this difficult situation. Free from their mother's toxic influence, the children had developed genuine friendships based on shared interests and mutual respect. Tyler had even stood up for Jake at school when another child made insensitive comments about his mother's death, showing how healthy family relationships can model courage and loyalty. The carpentry club Robert had started for the three children had become a weekly tradition that built both practical skills and emotional bonds. Working with their hands, creating useful objects, and receiving praise for their efforts had boosted all three children's confidence and provided positive male role modeling that balanced the chaos Emma had created in their lives. Dr. Martinez had explained to me that children who experience emotional abuse often struggle with self-worth and trusting their own perceptions. Jake's recovery had been remarkable partly because the abuse was identified and stopped before it became his normal reality. His resilience had inspired me to become an advocate for other single parents facing family pressure and manipulation. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love, even when others didn't understand your choice or criticized your actions? How did you find the courage to put their safety and well-being above keeping peace with family members who were causing harm? I'd love to hear about your experiences and the lessons you learned in the comments below. And if this story resonated with your own struggles or gave you strength to take action, please give it a like to help other parents who might be facing similar situations with toxic family members. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family challenges and the strength we discover when fighting for the people we love most, especially children who depend on us for protection. And please share this story with anyone who might need encouragement to trust their instincts when protecting their children from emotional manipulation or abuse, even when it comes from people they're supposed to trust. Thank you for listening to Jake's story and mine, and I hope you always remember that true family lifts each other up rather than tearing each other down, and that protecting our children's emotional safety is always worth any temporary conflict it might create with adults who refuse to acknowledge their harmful behavior.